Welcome to this afternoon session with myself, Adam Tooze, and
Elizabeth Thurbon.
And we feel we need to have an honest conversation on climate. And when anyone says to you, we need to have an honest conversation, you know that there's something on their mind. And what's on our mind here is the sense that we need to look back at the last 10 years. We need to look back at what for many of us is a kind of pivotal moment in our thinking about sustainable development globally, which are the 2015 agreements, both the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN and the Paris Climate Agreements. And we need to ask ourselves where we stand now in relation to that paradigm that was agreed at that moment. And I say this, I have an English accent, but I'm based in the US. I say this obviously coming in part from a US perspective, but I think around the world there is a sense of sobering up. There is a sense of asking ourselves 10 years on from the 2015 paradigm, where that agenda's at and where we might go from here. And Liz and I's job, I think, is both to raise the hard question, which hereby I am doing. I don't think we can any longer cleave to the optimistic assumptions of the 2015 moment, which was so key for so many of us, the net zero accumulations, the rather sanguine assumption that was so crucial to folks at Davos, that private and public go together, that billions will turn into trillions, that blended finance will solve our problems. We are, I think, beyond that moment, and the question is where we go from here. And we want to think hard about that, honestly about that, and openly. We don't mean to be just profoundly pessimistic, because I think it would be unrealistic also to suggest that nothing happened over this decade. As you can see here, global emissions growth after the drama of the 90s and the 2000s, driven so hard by China, began to slow. And any slowing is not a triumph, but it's the beginning of turning this ship around. A new vision, I think it's fair to say, of green energy emerged in a positive sense. You don't have to watch just Chinese official television to get endless soothing images of windmills turning and photovoltaic farms and smooth, silent, ultra-high-speed, electrically powered railways. There is a realistic sense, I think, of the technologies that might take us to a better place. And countries did start taking action. These are countries that adopted strategies of net zero targeting. The slides here are themselves a historic document. At various points, the WEF, the forum, has attempted to map strategies for policy. So the Americans had a net zero target for a while. They don't have one now. They didn't have one before. They go back and forth. But we could map the world in these terms. And investment is genuinely shifting. This, as an economic historian, is perhaps one of the most staggering graphs that you can see out there. This is the balance between renewable and fossil investment. And if you told me 20 years ago that, according to this year's numbers, renewable investment in energy would be twice what it is in fossil, I would have asked to be smoking some of what you were smoking. That is our reality today. And it isn't because fossil has collapsed, it's because there has been a gigantic surge in renewable, above all led by China. And there has been a range of policy announcement on this theme in a way which has changed the world as well. We've gone from a world of 1990s industrial policy, or rather the fatwa against industrial policy. You shall not look at the way things are produced, because if you do, you are violating the deep, dark secrets of the market, and no one would do this for fear of condemnation by the Saint Friedrich Hayek, to a policy world in which we're all constantly thinking about how to make things, how to do them better. Of course, this too has a dark side, which is that it's rivalrous, it's competitive, it can be exclusionary, it can be about the promotion of a kind of aggressive nationalism that we're all too familiar with. But it did allow us at various points, and this truly is one of those historic WEF slides, to begin to actually think hard about typologies of the way in which different countries around the world would achieve full-blown green transitions. We went from a world of thinking about the climate problem 30 or 40 years ago, when it was a warning from scientists and really no means of doing much about it. Our best hope was carbon pricing. We'd stick the price up and then technology would come along. to a world where something like the WEF could actually map different trajectories. This is historic because you can see the United States, Germany, and China are mapped on the same transition path, which is a green modernization path. And it's this historic shift that Liz and I really want to foreground, because this is no longer our reality. The stakes were huge in the last American election. There could be no doubt about it. The path was mapped. The most optimistic strategy was the blue line. The realistic one the Biden people had the United States on was on green. The American electorate, in a clear, decisive outcome, opted for a path worse than the red path mapped here. And that leaves us with the central question of our current moment, and this is, I think, the question which we have to honestly face if we're going to talk seriously about where climate policy is now, which is, where are we going next? What are the strategies that will take us forward? Do we declare a wholesale failure of the 2015 paradigm? Or are there things that can be saved from the wreckage, can be moved forward? You can see this is a rhetorical question I'm asking, and I'm going to turn to Liz, my partner here, to give us a map of where one might reasonably think about strategies for going forward, honestly facing both the ambition of where we were 10 years ago and the realistic assessment that the straight path to that ambition is not how we're going to get there. The realization of accumulation, a wonderful matrix, a nice WEF mapping of net zero targets is not our future. So I guess our question is what might be our future?
What might be indeed? Excellent question. And I think the chart, especially the final one on the United States and the growing uncertainty, the real uncertainty, could be cause for pessimism, and you might think failure. But I think, to take you up on the, not going down the entirely pessimistic line, I think that there are 5 good reasons to be optimistic about where we might be headed, but we might not be headed there in the way that we envisaged we'll get there in 2015. So I think to start with the first reason, and the first reason boils down to China, because we are sitting here in the birthplace of the global green industrial revolution. And China has been driving the transition, not just since 2015, but way back in 2003, China committed to starting to think about what a different energy future would look like. And of course, that has been ramping up remarkably in the past 10 years. And when we saw that chart about, fossil fuel versus renewable investment, a lot of that is thanks to China, 40% of, global investment in renewables at the moment. And that trajectory is not changing. Whatever is happening in the United States at the moment, whatever is happening globally, that will not change China's determination, I don't think.
We're at a turning point here, potentially, aren't we? The red bar is...
Yes, we are. And I think that's because the Chinese government realises a crucial point that I think that we have missed in the West, and that is that the energy transition is the key to national security. It's the key to comprehensive national security. Because the Chinese government understands that when you promote the renewable energy transition, you can boost energy security by reducing fossil fuel reliance. You can boost economic security by creating the new technology-intensive, export-oriented industries of the future. You can boost environmental security by reducing emissions, reducing particulate pollution. You can boost social security by creating new green jobs, regional development, community prosperity, and you can boost geostrategic security by enhancing your international status and prestige and attracting new allies, particularly across the developing world, where China has been investing so heavily in the green transition. So that is not going to change. And that is reason for optimism. I think the second reason for optimism is that that has had a profound impact on energy prices, on renewable energy prices. Because renewable energy is manufactured and subject to the learning curves associated with manufacturing, you see this rapid decline in the cost of renewable energy. And who would have predicted 5 years ago the cost of solar and the cost of batteries? It is phenomenal, the rate at which this cost has come down. And so it's changed the economic logic already, I think, of the transition, and is another reason why it's not going to reverse.
Even in Texas, right?
Even in Texas, who would have thought? I think the third reason too is that with this strategic activism that we've seen in not just China, but in Japan, in Korea, embracing a more ambitious and strategic role for the government in enabling the transition, we've of course seen green industrial policy become normalised across the West. And I think this was a really interesting chart that showed the growing experimentation with green industrial policy. I think what the chart probably didn't reveal was that not all green industrial policy is created equal. And industrial policy doesn't really capture, I think, what's going on in East Asia, which is a much more ambitious, much more strategic approach that I think is more akin to statecraft than industry policy. I think industry policy is this really kind of broad, catch-all term, and it can be motivated by anything. For example, pork barrelling, industry capture, all range of goals. And it also can be not particularly coordinated. It can be contradictory with other climate objectives. So I think that that's something that we need to grapple with in the West as well.
How useful do you find the idea of the electric state or the electro-state as a description of China? Because that would go to this sense of green energy policy as being far more than just a scattershot, water can kind of industrial policy.
Yes, I think it captures it. It captures the vision very well, and of course electrification is the key part of the puzzle to the renewable transition. But I do think, that it captures this idea that there is a statecraft involved in what's going on, and if we can wrap the other point that I think is important to make is that China, Korea, Japan understand this kind of comprehensive security enhancing potential of the energy transition, but that opportunity is there for any country, that can appreciate this opportunity. But it does entail a much different kind of governance. It's a governance challenge that we're not used to in the West after decades of hollowing out of state capabilities, thanks to, Hayek and, all kinds of ideological commitments to...
Just the lack of growth in energy demand, right? I mean, we're just not used in Europe or the United States to rapidly growing energy demand.
Yes,
there hasn't been any incentive to do very fast-moving innovation.
Yeah, that's true. And just a very different willingness to experiment with different kinds of policy instruments. So, to come back to this idea of, net zero, I think that we have been very wedded to this idea that the best way to expedite the green transition is to set a goal like that and then to do all we can to put a price on carbon, which of course is important. But putting a price on carbon doesn't necessarily direct capital to a particular set of industries. It just tells you what not to do. It doesn't really tell you what to do. And I think, if you think about the key differences between the industrial strategies that we see in the West and those that we see in East Asia, there's a much greater willingness to experiment with both supply side policies, so subsidies, etc., but also crucially demand side policies, where the government issues offtakes or uses its purchasing power as a stimulus. And we're not used to that kind of approach.
So we want to make this as interactive session. We welcome questions from you, but we kind of anticipated that there might be 3 directions in which the conversation would go, and we thought we'd kind of put those on the agenda. I think they're summed up by this rather funky pop art slide. AI, batteries, and nuclear as the idea, the vision that simply won't die. What's your take on these as potential drivers, challenges to the energy transition? I mean, is AI going to be the demand side driver that the West has so far failed to provide through policy, and now all of a sudden the tech dudes in California are going to along with the $250 billion of investment they're pumping into AI, which is almost a Chinese-style method, but coming from private finance. Is AI going to do the work on the energy front? Some people think of it as a naturally fine with nuclear, which always reminds me of a kind of 1950s or 60s Jetsons-style vision of the future, artificial brains powered by atomic power stations. But maybe I'm kind of prejudicing the question here. Do you see these as key drivers of where we might be headed?
Well, the demand issue is key, obviously, with AI, and there has been this renewed interest in nuclear, I think, as a result. But you know, when you look at where the investment is flowing, nuclear as a percentage of energy investment is nowhere near the size of renewables, and also, I realistically would want to be looking at SMRs. And that is technologically unproven still. So I think, certainly putting the Australian hat on for example, we certainly wouldn't want to rule out any technological option in the future that's smart and that's cost effective. But in Australia, unfortunately, the nuclear debate has arisen in the context of a desire to really stall the energy transition and to allow the continuation of coal and gas for longer. So I think that this, we have to acknowledge that there are a really complex set of interests that are intersecting with this nuclear debate. I think that nuclear is a debate that we have to have, but it has to be a debate that's clear-eyed and that is very attentive to the possibility that this debate can be hijacked in ways that are detrimental to, I think, the pursuit of actually existing technologies that are actually cost competitive right now. You just can't beat solar and batteries at the moment in many parts of the globe. So, yeah.
Yeah, that does strike me as a rather interesting feature of our current moment, which is that the backlash against 2015 comes in a variety of forms, including, in the European context, the endless talk about technological openness. In other words, insistence, for instance, on hydrogen as a key pathway, whereas all of the economics tells us that it's just not likely to be a big driver. Or a kind of insistence that Europe closed a bright future for itself by pushing towards decommissioning nuclear reactors. When the economics are utterly overwhelming, there's almost a kind of clinging to conservative technological fantasies in the face of the banal reality that the green energy push of the 2000s and the 2010s has given us in the form of solar and batteries, an unprecedentedly cheap technology, with various types of problems to do with intermittency and the capital cost, but nevertheless, it's a kind of astonishing breakthrough in our capacity to deliver truly cheap power. And there's almost a kind of, we need to hold this at arm's length. It's as though it's the gift horse that we are determined to look in the mouth of, to really check whether it's really, really true. And to my mind, I mean, I referred jokingly to Texas a minute ago, but I think it's extremely telling that in this particular moment, Texas is a state whose legislators have essentially outlawed the 2015 agenda. I mean, are literally surgically gone after anyone who is writing ESG, really conventional norms, which in Europe are just bread and butter, matters of decent corporate citizenship. And even reference to that will attract the ire of very serious and nasty litigation in Texas, combined with an exclusion from any business, any public business in a state, which is like a large Chinese province or the size of Spain. This is a big slice of the world economy you don't want to be excluded from. And yet those same people who really have waged ideological war on the 2015 consensus, when it comes to actually deciding the question of where they're going to get the power for their air conditioners the next time the summer gets unbearably hot in Houston, have actually now junked and shot down the conservative agenda of killing renewables in Texas. And now Texas has emerged as the largest renewable driver in the United States, larger even than California. And again, you know, you might think, why are we talking about a single American province, which is what Texas is? But it's very big in certainly European terms, and in ideological terms, it's such a clear marker of where even a MAGA America, really die-in-the-wool, heavily committed to the ideological culture war, cannot resist the economics of the batteries. They just can't break the realization. And so what they do is they translate it to talk about your national security doctrine. It's really fascinating. The way they do it is to say, Texas is divine, because these are fundamentalist Christians. So this is as committed as they are to any Chinese party member is committed to CCP ideology. The Texans are committed to the idea that Texas is providentially endowed by God with energy dominance. Energy dominance, right? So they take that language of the Trump first administration, freedom, molecules, and energy dominance, and clearly God intended Texas to be energy dominant. And if it's got oil and it's got gas, why on earth would it not also have wind and sun? And so how could it deny itself all four elements of God's power, right? So but it goes to the national security point, right?
It does.
It's about its identity.
You know, whatever gets you there. But to come back to this point about the way that we talk about the drivers, it's just so crucial, because, you know, we can talk about the obstacles to the transition being, you know, these big geopolitical dynamics, but when it comes down to it, the biggest obstacle is the lack of a social and political consensus, right? So how do you build a social and political consensus? How do you appeal to that? And I think, you know, if we are having this honest conversation, we have to ask ourselves if framing the imperative solely in terms of climate has done us more harm than good, not because climate is not the imperative. Climate is the existential challenge, and it is the moral challenge. There is no question. But that is not it. The reality is it is not a unifying discourse, it seems, unfortunately, because it has been entirely open to politicisation by populist parties who now equate climate action with the energy transition, and we have a stalling. It's obvious in my country, you know, a backlash against the energy transition, a backlash against renewables, a backlash against climate goals. This isn't to say that we should stop talking about climate. Of course we shouldn't stop talking about climate, and of course we shouldn't stop working towards the goals. But it strikes me as stunning that the country that has built the world's largest renewable energy system, and that is literally leading the world, and that has probably done more than any other country to help address the global climate crisis, that's China, by driving down the cost of renewables, has not been principally motivated by climate goals or climate ambition. And the reality is that the energy transition really does, this is not cynical, it really does have enormous security payoffs. They are huge, the economic security payoffs. You know, thinking about my country, Australia, and just coming to this point of green hydrogen for 1 second too, you know, we have got rich digging up and shipping out fossil fuels. And now we have this incredible opportunity. Iron ore is our largest export industry, and we have an opportunity to literally triple the size of our iron ore exports by processing them and creating green iron. And we'll do that through renewable hydrogen. And it's that story that has shifted the dial in Australia. And I think that these are the stories we need to tell in the West.
We've got 5 minutes, 50 seconds. I think that gives us time for 2 or 3 questions maybe. Do we have 2 or 3? One here, yes. Just go, the preeminent things to get the question.
Sure. Maybe not a question, just a comment, you know, so I'm the founder of AI company in ag space, and it's actually pretty scary for me. I'm from Israel, and it's pretty scary for me to see what our European colleagues do, betting very much on the support of government of adoption of that kind of technologies, because Europe is going 100% green in their production. But what if tomorrow someone's re-elected? This is not relevant anymore, and your business model is not viable. So the way we address it, I just want to support what you, Elizabeth, has said. Yes, that when we're talking to our customers, which are either big farmers or agricultural corporations, we're talking only about numbers. So this is why my technology actually makes your business more profitable. If you want to have a sustainability conversation, I'm super open to do that, and my technology makes you more sustainable. But if you don't care, I'm not talking about that, and I believe that's probably the way to address that.
That's a very interesting observation. Do we have other questions in the room? Wow, we have not provoked anyone into outrage. One at the back, yes. Get the man a mic.
Sometimes I find, last year I came to Dalian first time at the Summer Davos, and I walked away and went home and said to my wife, I think our car industry is dead, they just don't know it yet, okay?
Yeah.
And I find the conversation...
Where did you go home to?
Canada, sorry.
Canada.
And I find these discussions here are not well known by the public in our nations. They're known in this room, but the general public doesn't know that China built solar power enough for many countries over in 1 year, right? So I don't know, where do you see the source of that? Like, what can we do to fix it? Because I think people can get behind the fact that we're falling behind like crazy, right?
One more. So what do we do about this question? I mean, you referred to social consensus, political consensus. That's essentially the question that lies there. Is it a matter of the right politicians, the wrong politicians being elected at the opportune moment? And what do we do about this perception gap that, in a sense, a large part of industry in the West is a dead man walking? In light of not simply the political agenda, but in fact just the economic realities of this huge shift in energy costs?
It's a very big question. I think, so I've already talked about the reframing that I think is necessary. But moving aside from the reframing, I think we have to have a serious think about the policy instruments that we're actually willing to employ, because the transition isn't going to happen as rapidly as we need it to, and with the payoffs that will result in the social consensus like we need it to, without more ambition from governments, and to move beyond these more kind of tinkering around the edges to some more heavy demand side policies. So for example, in Australia we have this incredible opportunity I was saying around green iron, and the government's been talking to this point about the supply, about subsidies, and production tax credits, but still we're not moving towards investment decisions, and arguably that's because there isn't that certainty of demand.
A critic or skeptic listening to this conversation would suggest, okay, Davos people tried to do ESG through the front door, and their strategy then was moralism, right? They went around the world telling everyone they had to do this because otherwise we were bad, and this was the ethical and moral imperative. And now I listen to Liz, and I'm hearing her say we need to do this through the back door. In other words, this is a strategy of the noble lie. We're going to say that it's about a dozen other things, and really the yardstick of our ambition, when you say we need more ambition in this zone, a lot of conservatives would say, look, why are we going here? And ultimately it seems to me that you're retaining a net zero strategy. You're just kind of working through the outlines of what we need to get there, but backing into it rather than going through the front door.
I would disagree, actually, because I don't think that this is denying the climate imperative and doing other things. I think that this is trying to highlight the fact that they are actually mutually supportive and they're mutually reinforcing, and that we won't get to the climate goals without fundamentally growing, like rapidly growing, the renewables part of the economy. This is a growth story, and growth stories are economic stories.
Yes.
And they're hopefully social inclusion stories as well. So, you know, this is around, for example, you know, when we're talking about political and social consensus building, you will not find greater resistance to the renewable transition than if you start going headlong into it without also delivering social benefit. So, for example, thinking about, you know, this renewables revolution will unfold largely in regional and remote communities, on lands of First Nations people, on farming land. This is about creating buy-in. This is about, for example, Indigenous ownership of renewable energy. This is about community ownership of energy projects. This is an economic and social revitalisation story. And so, because I think that pursuing net zero without also thinking about questions of development, why are we doing it? You know, there's no point meeting climate goals if then, you know, if people don't have a life to live, sustain, you know, if they don't have the economic means to sustain themselves.
Thank you. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for being my partner in the chat. Thank you all for being here, and wishing you all a wonderful afternoon at Summer Davos. Thank you.